You know, there is this really fascinating, almost eerie phenomenon that happens when you are reading something truly profound.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like you are just scanning the page, taking in the words, and then suddenly you stop dead in your tracks. You read a single sentence and a cold shiver goes down your spine.
Right, because it hits you on a totally different level.
Exactly. You think, wait a minute, I have thought exactly this before, but you never actually said it out loud. You just dismiss it as silly or maybe too weird, or perhaps just not what the people around you wanted to hear.
You buried it.
Yeah, you completely buried it. And yet here it is, written by some brilliant mind, staring right back at you from the page.
It is a really profound experience, and Ralph Waldo Emerson captured that exact feeling perfectly. I mean, he observed that in every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts.
Our rejected thoughts, that is such a powerful way to frame it.
Right. And he says they come back to us with a certain, well, as he called it, alienated majesty.
Alienated majesty. Oh, wow.
It
Yeah.
is a beautiful phrase. But if you really think about the mechanics of that phrase, it actually represents a quiet, everyday tragedy.
Yeah, because it begs the question, why did we alienate those thoughts in the first place?
Exactly. Why did we exile our own intuition? Why do we require a stranger, perhaps someone writing hundreds of years ago, to validate the very thing that was already sitting quietly inside of our own minds?
That quiet tragedy, that instinct to exile our own inner voice is exactly what we are going to completely dismantle today. Welcome back to the YouTube channel, Classic Mosaic Truth.
We have a really great one today.
We do. This is episode 5 of our deep dive series into Ralph Waldo Emerson's foundational book, Self-Reliance. If this episode helps you, please hit like and subscribe for the next one.
It makes a huge difference.
It really does. So today we are taking a calm, confident, and highly practical look at one of the most vital themes in human existence, which is self-expression.
A huge topic.
Massive. And I want to be clear right off the bat, we are talking directly to you, the listener. We are going to act as your guides through Emerson's timeless wisdom.
Unpacking the underlying psychological mechanics, really.
Right. Unpacking how you can actually learn to trust that inner voice and express it confidently in the modern world.
Because the core mission of this deep dive is discovery. What we are really talking about is uncovering the architecture of inner authority.
Inner authority, I like that. So where do we start?
Well, first, when we examine self-expression through this lens, we have to understand what it actually means. I mean, true self-expression is not about being the loudest person in the room.
Right. It is not just making noise.
Exactly. It is not about, adopting eccentric clothes just to draw a crowd. It is defined fundamentally as the need to express what is original and valuable to you as an individual, completely regardless of group expectations.
Completely regardless. That is the hard part right there.
It really is. But Emerson believed that true genius comes from the bold assertion of sincere beliefs. It is about trusting what he called the aboriginal self.
The aboriginal self.
He wrote, "Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string."
I want to linger on that image for a moment because that iron string metaphor is just so mechanically precise.
It is a great visual.
Right. Because an iron string on an instrument is structural. It is under immense tension, and it resonates at a very specific native frequency. It implies that inside every single one of us, there's a foundational frequency that is entirely our own. But this kind of raises an immediate glaring question for me.
What is that?
Well, if self-expression is so natural, if it is quite literally our aboriginal self, our native hardware, then why does almost everyone struggle with it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Why is our default human setting to hide?
Well, next we have to look at the environment in which that native hardware operates. It really comes down to the fear of judgment and rejection.
Which is pretty universal, I think.
Right. But it is not just a mild social anxiety. It is deeply evolutionarily ingrained in human psychology.
Okay, how so?
Emerson uses a brilliant historical metaphor for this. He says that society acts like a joint stock company.
A joint stock company, like a corporation.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Think about what a joint stock company meant in the mid-19th century. Members pool their resources, they share the risk, and in return, they agree to surrender a certain amount of individual liberty and culture to secure their daily bread.
So it is a trade-off.
Exactly. The price of admission to society, the currency it demands in exchange for security, is conformity.
Wow. Conformity as a currency.
Yes. And society does not just request this conformity politely. Emerson warns that for nonconformity, the world whips you with its displeasure.
Whips you. That is visceral. It is not a gentle nudge. It is an active, painful punishment.
It is meant to hurt.
And I imagine that whip is something we feel physically, right? Not just intellectually.
Precisely. And modern evolutionary biology and psychology completely map onto Emerson's 19th century philosophical observations.
Really, like the science actually backs up this old philosophy.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
We can see the mechanical reality of this whip if we look at the famous Asch conformity experiments.
Oh, I think I remember hearing about those. That is the one with the lines, right?
Yes, exactly. The psychological reality of this fear becomes terrifyingly clear when you look at the raw data there. In these experiments, a subject was placed in a room with a group of actors.
But the subject did not know they were actors.
Right. The actual subject thought everyone else was just another volunteer. They were all shown lines of different lengths on a board and simply asked to identify which ones matched.
So it was just a straightforward visual test, nothing tricky.
Nothing tricky at all. But the actors intentionally and unanimously chose the wrong answer.
Right, and it is crucial to note that they chose an answer that was objectively, visibly incorrect to the naked eye. We are not talking about a confusing optical illusion here.
Exactly. It was glaringly obvious. And yet, a shocking number of the real subjects went along with the completely wrong answer.
That is just wild to me.
It is. But here is the critical part, the why behind the behavior. They did not actually believe the wrong answer was right.
Wait, so they knew it was wrong but said it anyway?
Yes, they literally denied their own sensory perceptions just to avoid standing out, risking ridicule, or facing the disapproval of the group.
So they suppressed their true perceptions simply to fit in.
Exactly. And when researchers look at the biology of what happens in moments like this, the brain's amygdala, which is the fear center, it lights up.
Oh, wow. So their brains were reacting like they were in physical danger.
Yes, because in our evolutionary past, being ostracized from the tribe meant wandering alone into the wilderness and dying.
You needed the tribe to survive.
Right. Our brains are hardwired to view social rejection as a literal death threat. The subjects in the Asch experiments were sweating. They were shifting in their chairs.
Over a test about lines on a board.
Yes. They experienced severe psychological distress, tension, and self-doubt. They conform to avoid the biological alarm bells of making waves.
Okay, here is where I want to push back a little bit, though.
Yeah.
Because we have to separate biological terror from just, being a functioning adult in society. Isn't conformity sometimes just basic politeness?
Well, what do you mean?
Like, if I'm invited to a wedding, I wear a suit because that is the expected norm. I am conforming to the dress code, but my amygdala isn't firing, and I am certainly not betraying my soul.
Right, I see what you're saying.
But the kind of conformity Emerson is warning against feels fundamentally different than that. It is more like, imagine wearing a heavy insulated winter coat in the middle of a sweltering summer just because everyone else around you is wearing one.
That is a great analogy.
Sure, it helps you blend into the crowd visually, but underneath you are sweating, you are miserable, your core temperature is rising, and you are quietly suffocating.
Yes, that is a much more accurate analogy for the danger we are discussing. There is a massive difference between basic social grace, which acts as the necessary lubrication for smooth human interactions, and the deep psychological distress that occurs when we constantly override our internal hardware to please the collective.
The psychological suffocation.
Exactly. Carl Jung explored the mechanics of this deeply. He noted that we wake up, we put on a mask for the collective, what he called the persona, and we bury the authentic self.
So the suit at the wedding is just social grace.
Right. Social grace is contextual and temporary. Psychological suffocation is wearing the persona so often in so many contexts that you actually forget what your native face looks like.
Oh man, you forget your own face.
You do. You begin to identify entirely with the mask, and you lose touch with your center. The tension between the native hardware and the heavy winter coat of the persona eventually fractures the psyche.
Okay, so if the psychological stakes are really that high, how do we actually strip off that heavy coat? Because it is one thing to read Emerson talking about society in the 1840s.
Right, the context was different.
Exactly. You and I are not living in a cabin in the woods of Massachusetts. We are navigating modern, open-plan offices, endless corporate group chats, social media algorithms engineered for conformity, neighborhood associations.
A modern joint stock company.
Exactly. So how do we translate this 19th century philosophy into a practical blueprint for the present day?
Well, we can operationalize this by breaking it down into three modern pillars: Communication, personal style, and decisions aligned with identity.
Okay, 3 pillars. Let's start with the first one, communication.
First, let's look at communication. In a modern context, Emersonian self-reliance requires the active, daily practice of candor.
Candor, like just being brutally honest.
Not brutal, necessarily. Candor is the explicit refusal to say what you are expected to say when it contradicts what you actually think or feel.
I see.
It is about breaking the habit of throwing out unfiltered, performative comments just to get a laugh. Or, on the flip side, hiding behind what Emerson called the prison uniform of the party.
The prison uniform of the party, that is a heavy phrase.
It happens constantly today. We adopt the talking points of our political group, our corporate culture, or our social circle, and we just recite them like lines in a play.
We outsource our thinking to the collective.
Exactly. We let the party dictate our words.
The prison uniform of the party. That phrase just perfectly describes how we willingly lock ourselves inside these ideological boxes.
We really do.
We put on the uniform so the guard society won't whip us. But then the second pillar is personal style, which I assume is clearly about way more than just the aesthetic choices we make with our clothes, right?
Much more. Personal style is about rejecting the blind imitation of trends across your entire life ecosystem.
What does that look like?
It is how you decorate your home, the media you passively consume, the hobbies you pursue, because they look good on a digital profile. Emerson famously warned that imitation is suicide.
Imitation is suicide.
Yes. When you blindly copy the mechanics of someone else's life, you are killing off your own unique potential. You are surrendering the vibration of your iron string for the safety of the herd.
Okay, let me stop you there because that sounds incredibly definitive. Imitation is suicide. But wait, isn't all human learning fundamentally based on imitation?
Well, yes, learning is.
Like, a baby learns language by imitating its parents. We learn to paint by copying the masters. We learn science by repeating the experiments of those who came before us.
Right. That's true.
So, at what point does healthy, necessary imitation cross the line and become psychological suicide?
That is a vital distinction to make. Healthy imitation is about acquiring tools. You imitate the master painter's brushstroke so you can learn the physics of the paint.
So you understand how it works.
Right. You imitate the vocabulary so you can understand the grammar. That is skill acquisition.
Okay, so what is the suicide part?
Psychological suicide, which is what Emerson is critiquing, is when you adopt someone else's essence or their conclusions without doing the underlying work yourself.
Oh, I see.
It is adopting their worldview, their opinions, and their desires as a substitute for your own. You stop using the tools to build your own house, and you just move into a replica of theirs.
Ah, that makes perfect sense. Acquiring the tools versus adopting the essence. And that distinction really leads right into the third pillar, right? Making decisions align with your deep identity, because this is where the tools actually get put to work.
Yes. Next, this is where we bring Carl Jung back into the mechanical explanation. Jung talked about a process called individuation.
Individuation.
Right. This is not a passive state. It is the active, often painful, psychological journey of becoming whole, of becoming who you natively are.
And how does that relate to making decisions?
A massive part of individuation is the mechanism of reclaiming the parts of yourself that you previously gave away to please the joint stock company.
Reclaiming your pieces.
Yes. Reclaiming your time, your peace, your silence, and your psychological space. If you are constantly making decisions based on what will make your family happy or your boss happy or your friends comfortable.
Which is exhausting.
It is. If you do that while entirely ignoring that iron string vibrating inside you, you are halting the individuation process. You are fracturing your identity to keep the peace.
So if individuation is the goal, we really need to look at the specific arenas where we are currently fracturing ourselves.
We do.
Let's map this onto our daily lives and look at how this lack of self-expression practically manifests, starting with work. Because there is a huge invisible cost to not speaking your ideas.
Absolutely. First, in the workplace, true self-reliance manifests as a behavior we can call intellectual bravery.
Intellectual bravery, I like the sound of that.
It is the pursuit of a high standard where you actively transcend the default groupthink of the organization.
Can you give an example of what that looks like?
Imagine you are in a sterile conference room for a team meeting, and everyone is nodding along with a new strategic plan that, based on your specific expertise, is fundamentally flawed.
Well, we have all been in that room.
Right. Intellectual bravery is the refusal to nod along just to keep the meeting short. It is the reporter who suggests an unpopular editorial angle in the interest of objective truth, knowing it will irritate the editor.
Right. There is a remarkably specific example of this that perfectly illustrates the mechanics of intellectual bravery, actually.
What is that?
Consider an unusually talented engineer who realizes that the endless, recurring team meetings are an absolute sinkhole for productivity. They realize the meetings exist just to validate the hierarchy.
So what do they do?
Well, what they do is they simply stop attending them.
Just like that.
Just like that. They don't write a manifesto. They don't make a big dramatic scene and storm out. They just prioritize genuine action and deep work over performing for middle management.
They know their worth.
Exactly. They understand that their core value is in the elegant code they write, not in keeping a chair warm to make a manager feel important.
Exactly. The engineer is prioritizing reality over custom. They are trusting their native assessment of the situation over the prescribed corporate routine.
It is a bold move, but it is authentic.
Next, we have to examine the arena where this bravery usually completely falls apart, which is our personal relationship.
Oh, yeah. That is a tough one.
How often do we hide our true opinions just to keep the peace at the dinner table?
All the time. Constantly.
Emerson has a quote here that is genuinely shocking when you first encounter it. He says, "I shun father and mother and wife and brother when my genius calls me."
Okay, I have to admit, the first time I read that, I thought, wow, Emerson sounds like a genuinely terrible person to invite to Thanksgiving dinner.
It does sound a bit abrasive.
It sounds incredibly harsh, almost callous. If intellectual bravery solves the workplace conformity issue, why does he advocate for such extreme behavior the second we interact with our family?
It sounds harsh, but we really have to look at the mechanics of what he's actually saying. He is not advocating for cruelty, isolation, or abandoning your family.
Okay, then what is the shunning about?
He's talking about severing the toxic habit of hiding your truth to endlessly manage other people's emotional states. Think about the energy expenditure required to constantly soften your edges.
It is draining.
It is. If you routinely agree with your family's opinions when you actually find them deeply flawed, just to avoid an argument, you are betraying yourself.
You are burying the native frequency again.
Yes. True self-reliance in relationships means learning the mechanics of saying no without attaching a 10-minute apology to it.
Just a simple no.
Boundaries are not brick walls meant to keep people out. They are the necessary structural lines that define exactly where you end and someone else begins.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. Boundaries are where you end and someone else begins, and no is a complete sentence.
It really is.
You do not have to guilt-trip yourself into a lengthy, fabricated explanation.
Exactly.
Finally, let's look at the most granular level, which is our daily habits. How we fail to follow our own personal direction in the mundane, fleeting moments. There's a phrase Emerson uses that felt like it reached out and grabbed me by the collar. He calls it the foolish face of praise.
Oh, yes. We have all worn that face.
Oh, absolutely.
It is a biological reaction. It is that forced, tight smile we plaster on in company when we do not feel at ease, when we are trapped at a networking event, listening to a conversation that does not interest us in the slightest.
And you can feel it physically.
If you pay attention to your body, the muscles in the face literally tighten. The vagus nerve responds to the inauthenticity. We are acting from a low, usurping willfulness.
What does that mean? Low, usurping willfulness.
It means we are forcing the muscles to perform, rather than acting from spontaneous native joy. We put on a polite performance that exhausts our central nervous system.
We basically drag around what he calls the corpse of memory.
Yes, the corpse of memory.
We stay consistent with things we said in the past or roles we played in the past just because the people around us expect it. We're terrified of contradicting a version of ourselves that no longer exists.
But as Emerson points out, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds.
Right.
To be self-reliant, you must act from your current intuition, from your present truth, rather than from the expectations generated by past behavior.
Okay, so we have diagnosed the machinery of the problem. We see how the heavy code is suffocating us. Now we need the cure.
The practical part.
Right. I want to shift from philosophical theory to highly specific practical application for you, the listener. We are going to introduce an exercise called the expression reset.
The expression reset.
Yes, and this is not vague advice. It is a mechanical process.
This is a tactical exercise in reclaiming your psychological sovereignty. First, you need to identify one specific area in your life where you are currently holding back.
Just one area to start.
Just one. And you do this not by thinking, but by feeling. Pay attention to your physical signals, your somatic markers.
So listen to your body.
Yes. Your nervous system picks up on inauthenticity microseconds before your conscious brain does. Notice exactly where you feel a sudden tightness in your chest, a certain tension in the jaw during a conversation, or that low, vibrating buzz of discomfort where you usually freeze and second-guess your inner voice.
That physical discomfort is your intuition loudly signaling that you are putting on the mask.
It is the alarm bell.
So once you identify that specific area, maybe it is a recurring weekly meeting or a toxic dynamic with a certain friend, the next step is to choose one small, highly specific act of expression to reclaim your peace.
It does not have to be dramatic.
Exactly. You don't need to flip a table and quit your job. We can use a framework like the 3-second rule for candor.
How does that work?
Well, when someone asks for your opinion, give yourself 3 seconds to listen to your native reaction before the persona jumps in to filter it.
Yes, the scale of the act matters far less than the authenticity of it.
So true.
Finally, you must act without filtering. Genuine action explains itself, whereas conformity explains nothing. Do your chosen act without over-explaining it to the people around you, and crucially, without guilt-tripping yourself into it.
Okay, let's look at a concrete script for this.
Great idea.
If you decide to decline an invitation to an event you dread, just say, I won't be able to make it, but I hope you have a great time.
Simple and direct.
Right. Do not invent a fake scheduling conflict. Do not write a 3-paragraph text message apologizing and manufacturing a migraine. The psychological hurdle is the urge to manage their disappointment.
Yes. You have to let them be disappointed. Just act.
But wait, let's look at the potential pitfalls here, because this philosophy can easily be weaponized if misunderstood.
It definitely can.
Like, does being self-reliant give us a blank check to just be obnoxious? If I am feeling angry because I had a bad morning, does self-expression mean I get to scream at the barista who messed up my coffee order because that is my authentic feeling in the moment?
Firmly, no. That is a critical failure in understanding the mechanics of self-reliance. First, confusing expression with oversharing or acting out is an ego-driven trap.
So it is just ego.
Yes. Acting out and attention-seeking are explicitly defined as negative nonconformity. Violating a social norm just to express a volatile emotional state, like being impolite to a customer service worker, or violating norms simply to get people to look at you, that is not true self-reliance.
It is basically the opposite.
It is actually just another form of dependence. Your behavior is still entirely dictated by your desperate need for a reaction from others.
You are still letting the crowd control you.
Exactly. True self-reliance is centered, calm, and completely independent of the crowd's reaction, whether that reaction is applause or outrage.
It is the difference between standing in your own power and just throwing a tantrum.
Very well said.
And that brings me to the next big mistake, which is forcing authenticity instead of just allowing it.
What do you mean by forcing it?
It is like people who try so hard to be quirky or different that it becomes a completely exhausting, highly curated performance.
Oh, yes. The performance of uniqueness.
Right. Emerson says we lie in the lap of immense intelligence. We do not have to aggressively manufacture a unique persona. To use a modern analogy, it is like overclocking a computer processor.
Overclock it. Okay, expand on that.
Well, you can force the hardware to run faster and louder than it was designed to, and it might look impressive for a few minutes, but it generates massive amounts of heat and will eventually brain out the entire motherboard.
That is a perfect mechanical analogy.
Yeah.
You do not have to try to be unique by overclocking your personality. You inherently possess unique native hardware.
Exactly. You just need to run the software the hardware was natively built for.
True self-expression is simply allowing the native processing to happen. You stop nervously performing your individuality, you stop overclocking the system, and you just let the machine operate as designed.
You just exist as you are.
Precisely. And when you stop overclocking, you start to see the compounding power of expression. First, expression builds profound, unshakable confidence.
How does that happen?
Emerson notes that a person is relieved and gay when they have put their heart into their work and done their best, trusting that inner voice naturally builds what psychologists call an internal locus of control.
Internal locus of control, meaning you are in the driver's seat.
Right. You fundamentally rewire your brain to stop looking outside yourself for authority and validation. You become your own anchor.
That is powerful. Next, clarity comes through action. We spend so much time sitting around, paralyzed by overthinking, trying to figure out exactly who we are in a vacuum before we take a single step.
We get stuck in our heads.
We do. But clarity does not come from endless thinking. Genuine action explains itself and paves the way for the next right move. You only figure out the capabilities of the hardware by actually running it in the real world.
Finally, just like a biological muscle, identity strengthens with use.
It needs resistance to grow.
Exactly. When you stop editing yourself, when you stop softening your edges just to fit into the joint stock company, an amazing shift happens.
What happens?
Your true frequency, the vibration of that iron string, begins to naturally draw in the right opportunities and the right connections. You naturally filter out the people who only ever liked your mask, and you attract the people who resonate with your actual face.
Wow, this has been such a journey today. We started with the tragedy of recognizing our own rejected thoughts, the alienated majesty of our own intuition, but look at where we end up.
At a place of real empowerment.
Exactly. Today's small acts of expression, that single no without an apology, that 3-second rule applied to candor, that one moment of intellectual bravery in a sterile meeting room, those small mechanical acts lay the groundwork for tomorrow's unshakable belief in yourself.
They compound over time.
They really do. What if the very thoughts you've been actively hiding are exactly what your specific corner of the world desperately needs to hear?
That is the big question.
It is, and we are going to explore exactly how to build that unshakable belief in our next deep dive. Join us for episode 6, Confidence, How Action Builds Belief. Thanks for being here. If you want the full series, check the playlist, and please like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.